technological person either, so
Oh
don't
my
worry about it too
God.
much at all.
I was trying to make this romantic and I had candles on, but God. All right.
Don't worry about it. Thank you so much for joining us from the Kingdom of Bahrain. How is life over there at the moment in lockdown?
We live by the sea, so I don't really feel, I don't see too much, and I'm pretty much between the studio, between the house, and our studio is actually within the same complex. So
Okay.
luckily, I didn't have to vacate the studio because I can just go and walk there, you know. So no, it's been okay. I think with COVID, you go through days of where you think this is complete calm and you want to reflect, and other days where you have this, I think, very low feeling
Yes. Yes.
because you don't know what's coming and what's happening. And obviously you miss interacting with people, especially when you're in professions that are social professions of, you know, designing and talking. And
Yes.
so it's, so I don't know if we're going to die of corona or we're going to die of loneliness. So you know, I don't know which one is worse and which one will come first, to be honest.
Well, look, just as an introduction to our viewers
Yes.
and the people who are watching this broadcast later on as well, I just wanted to give them some background about you and who
Okay.
you are and how this conversation transpired. So I believe we had some mutual connections on Instagram. I noticed that you had been promoting some of our posts for the Art of Ramadan campaign. Thank you so much for your support. It was
You're
really
welcome.
invaluable. And then you and I had a conversation on Friday, a really good, almost 2-hour conversation.
Yes, that
And
was
I feel
wonderful.
we had a lot in common about our beliefs in Islamic art and what we're trying to do with this platform and what you
Yes.
also have been trying to do and what you have done successfully as a cultural design expert over the course of your career. So I'm just going to read a very brief biography just so our viewers can understand who you
Okay.
are and
All
why we
right.
have you on the call. So Sonia Ashour is the co-founder of the Department of Interior Design at Dar Al Hikmah, where she has also lectured in Foundation of Color, Graphics and Drawing. In 2001, Sonia founded AG Interior Design Consultants, where her firm handled high-profile sovereign and cultural projects, including embassies and residences for ambassadors for the Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the UNESCO Arab Regional Center for World Heritage in Bahrain. Restoration projects included the late Minoru Yamasaki Airport in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, and the Murad Guest House for the Ministry of Culture Bahrain, which is also a UNESCO World Heritage nominated project. That is quite a resume, Sonia.
Thank you.
That is a very, very impressive resume. I think really what I want to do is ask you, where did your creative journey begin?
I think like all, you know, the story that they always talk, the story of old children, how old children like to draw. So it's also pretty much was like that. But my grandfather from my mother's side is a textile designer, was a textile designer, and they still had the factories many years down the road. And my aunt and both my mother are artists, fine artists, and my aunt in Iran still teaches textile design, and she's also a painter. So coming from different cultural backgrounds and having different cultural strands, being part Uzbek, part Persian, part Ottoman Turkish, I was always surrounded, I would say more surrounded by Islamic art in different forms. So it was carpets or ceramics or textiles. So I pretty much grew up around, let's say, the color turquoise. I kind of pretty much grew up around that. And so art was not something foreign to me. And I liked the concept of art in general because it's something that brings people together in harmony, you know, void of conflict, because everybody agrees on the beauty of things. And so Islamic art in particular became something that I really related to just because it was familiar growing up with it. You know, maybe if I was raised in Italy, I would have been more maybe attracted to, you know, the art of the Renaissance. But because I grew up in this region and around these different cultural strands, that this became something that I identified with.
Do you kind of feel it's almost just ingrained into the very fabric of your being, and you just kind of absorbed all of these influences? Because you, as you mentioned, you are a mixture of so many different parts of the Islamic world. Do you feel that it's almost just been ingrained inside of you, you know, to be able to pursue this kind of a career? Was it something that you consciously set out to do, or do you think it just naturally gravitated? towards that side?
I think I never really thought about it. I mean, growing up as a child, you're just surrounded with these things, and you eat out of a turquoise bowl, or you have, rice in an old copper tray that has patterns. So it's very familiar, but it wasn't, I didn't set out to say I'm going to become, I'm going to specialize in Islamic art. I would think the contrary. I wanted to go, like every teenager, I wanted to go to the US, and I wanted to get my degree in the US, and I wanted to study hospitality design, which I did. And so for the years that I was in the US, the style was pretty much what was trendy or current at that time.
Yes.
It was not until, I would say, much later. I taught at Dar al-Hikmah. I set up the interior design department. And so as part of that, of setting up the curriculum, we had to review the existing curriculum that came from Houston, Texas. And so just a bit like basic design, drawing 101, graphics 101. And I was reading the exercises, and I thought, but these don't relate to us, these exercises. And I started trying to change the content, or to change the how can I say, the exercises to be more place specific. And so gradually, if there was going to be a pattern, it became an Islamic pattern. If it was about the foundation of color, so I was analyzing color in Islamic art. And so it was just a small trigger, but it started really from there. When I was teaching, it became interesting to me, so that I was learning and the students were learning. After that, I got a commission through Qatar to help with to co-help or co-design an ambassador resident in Rome with a Qatari designer. And so again, there was the start of the Islamic art patterns and so on. And soon after, I would say soon after, the interest just grew because I was in the region. I think if I had stayed in the US, maybe that would not have been an interest. But the interest grew. And I think the interest grew mainly, which somehow goes all the way back since childhood, is that when I was around 8 and my parents moved back to Saudi Arabia, I just spoke 2 languages, which was German and Farsi. And I couldn't understand the Arabic, and I learned English from TV, from Sesame Street and the Electric Company and things like that. Yeah, no, it was good, Mr. Rogers. So I learned it from that. And with time, I've always felt this need to belong, and I didn't. I looked different. Obviously I spoke a different language. And so with time, if it was in school and in university, it dawned on me that the Islamic empires were global. And all of the artists and the architects and the craftsmen were not necessarily Arab, and they were also not necessarily Muslim. And a good example would be Al-Andalus, how the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims came together to create phenomenal, those beautiful buildings. And if you look at, even from an Islamic history, that already at the time of the Caliphates, they already, at the time of Uthman, radiallahu anhu, they already went all the way to Italy. They went to Sicily.
Absolutely.
And so the idea was so intriguing to me that at that time, only like 650 AD, that the Muslims went out into the world wanting to learn and also building on existing cultures. So the fantastic architecture of Mughal India or Ottoman Turkey or the Abbasid was not something that came out of poof, air. It came on existing cultures that we embraced and even made more beautiful.
Exactly.
And this was the moment of intrigue. I thought, if I don't belong to a certain, let's say, sect or color or race or sect, but I belong to a bigger picture. I belong to this global vision, this global Islamic art world, because all of these amazing people were, they were Spanish or they were Persian or they were Uzbek or they were Turkish, but what brought them together was this amazing art form. And I think what really I like the most about Islamic art would be that Islamic art is science-based, it's knowledge-based. And so now I'll let you say something because I said so much.
The whole purpose of this conversation is for you to do the talking, Sonia. I'm merely here to coordinate the conversation. But everything that you're saying, it really is, it's all truth. I mean, you and I, when we had the discussion on Friday, we talked about how when Islam came to Europe, it didn't come here to consume the cultures of the countries. It came here to add and to enhance and to incorporate the good elements of those cultures. I mean, I've been fortunate enough, I think you have as well, to travel to the south of Spain.
Yes.
I'm sure you've been to the Alhambra. It is one
Yes.
of, I consider it to be one of the marvels of this world. And the fact that it's still there, it's still intact, you know, thank God we still have that example there of Muslim Spain for people to see. And you're absolutely right. It is just, you know, really important that we preserve this for future generations and to be able to understand what was important about these creations, these buildings that they built, and how has that impacted modern society in Europe as well. Because I think people forget, as you mentioned, that Islam came to Europe very, very early on.
Yes.
And, you know, it's very ignorant for people to think that that Europe has no Islamic history whatsoever. So I think it's really important for us to preserve these things. But you describe yourself quite rightfully as a cultural designer, not necessarily just an interior designer. Now, for people who don't necessarily understand what a cultural designer is, what do you mean by that term?
I mean, it's not very clear, but I can say that I can tell you what a cultural designer isn't. Let's say as a commercial designer, the two words, a cultural designer versus a commercial designer, both of them have an outcome. The commercial designer outcome is commerce, and the cultural designer outcome is culture. And so not that one is better than the other, they're just completely two different things. As a commercial designer, you work with a client, with their specific needs, maybe current trends, styles, and it doesn't really mean that you also have to agree with the ethics of that project or the ethics of the client. So you could be designing a restaurant that has a bar in it, for example. It could be a shopping mall. It could be not really your personal style, but it has a commercial impact. It has a commercial outcome. And usually those projects are actually easier because the requirements are very clear, the outcome is clear, the timelines are clear, and so are the rewards. With cultural design, you actually are working with creating a legacy to correct something, to either renovate, restore, or even if you're starting something from zero, you have to understand the cultural context of that country, the aspirations of that country, if it is intended to be a religious facility, if it's considered to be a theater, an embassy. So you have other ingredients that are more related of creating value, I would say. I mean, I cannot use the word because I believe culture as an outcome would be value, and that you leave behind a legacy. It's something for people from all walks of life to enjoy. And it's about preserving history, preserving memories. So the commercial aspect of it is actually quite low compared to a cultural project, compared to a commercial project where, for example, if you have a hotel, you have very clear guidelines, there are deadlines, timelines, you know, because it has to finish, it has to open, it has to make money. Whereas with cultural projects, you have so many different people involved in making this happen, especially when you work with UNESCO World Heritage. So you have restoration experts, you have, I don't know, lighting designers, you have a lot of people that come together to create this project. So it is really much more of a project of love versus that how much are we going to make on this? Because at most times, if you are lucky, you just cover your costs, but because the outcome, the goal of it is completely different, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. Because you cannot say, I'm going to go and work with UNESCO World Heritage or the Aga Khan, I'm going to become rich, because you will not, you know. But it has to do with what you actually want out of this. And like we talked about, I told you that at one point in my life, I've always sent out a CV every few years to see how much I was worth. So that if I would be worth, let's say, $5,000 at this age a month, if I could make that out of my office per month, like at the end of the year, I would be happy. So I'll be working for myself, but doing things that I really like. And so far, when this kind of work was not really trendy, which is now people are more interested in culture, and I get a lot of calls. But at the time when this was not trendy, I was pretty much poor. But the leaving behind a legacy is so important, because it is because of our ancestors that have created all this beauty. And they were not politicians, and they were not religious leaders. These were artists and craftsmen and architects, and without them, it would have been as if we never existed.
Yes.
So the Taj Mahal, Sultan Ahmed, a beautiful bowl from Nishapur, these were the creations of artists and creations of architects and designers.
How do you find, I mean, the cultural landscape of the Middle East has changed drastically in the last 20 years, I would say. When I look back to the first time I visited Dubai as a teenager, and at the age of 9 in 1997, to when I just went last year, it's radically different in every way. And it seems like a lot of the Middle Eastern countries are also following that same kind of, the same route of modernization. Do you find that there is a danger that the cultural legacy we risk losing that in areas of the world, not necessarily just the Middle East, but do you think that there is a danger that we could lose that if we don't do something to preserve it now? How important is cultural design today, I suppose, is my question.
That's a very big question. It's a whole mini-series. No, because, without trying to sound old-fashioned, I think one of the things I've tried very hard to do in my 20 years is to make both cultural design and Islamic art sexy, if you want to use that word. Because the moment, at my time even, when someone would talk about Islamic art or culture, I would always imagine like this dusty, mummy movie, and I've always wanted to make this something fresh and something relevant. I believe that there is a change in the last 5 years. There has been a big change for 5 or 10 years. And I think that the internet and social media and this connection among people, let's say worldwide, has made a really huge impact, in the sense that you see that Abu Dhabi started on this route of, on getting the bandwagon of culture, and then Qatar and Dubai and so on. And I think what happened was somehow with the modernization that happened, I think in Saudi it started earlier in the 60s, that when the modernization happened in the Gulf, so the first generation of this modernization were like, like the Indians when within the New World, when, the people from Europe came and sold them colored glass. They were like, wow, this is colored glass, broken colored glass, which was useless, and in return got land. I think we went through that whole period of colored glass where we didn't have this exposure. I'm talking about the GCC area, because we don't have an architectural heritage. And this reason per se, it's not like the rest of the Muslim world. So I think we went through that period of all this colored glass, cars and this and buildings. And I think then the next generation came, which is now a much younger generation than me, that started asking questions, but where did we come from? And who are we? And so I think this question now has become a trend. Like maybe 20 years ago, the trend word was sustainability, and then it became culture, and now these kids, I call them kids because they're quite young, but they are really interested. And most of my clients are in that age group between 25 and 35. And I think, is it relevant? It is very relevant. We face one problem is that I see is that we speak English as an international language. And I think it mainly has to do with the majority of the world was colonized. And so English became the language. Whereas the Islamic world, I want to say that it's called Arabic science. So everything was in Arabic, not only because of the religion, but because of the sciences. And so there's a lot of text, there was a lot of information that was in Arabic. But then you look at Mughal India, and then a lot of the work was both in Hindi and Farsi. And then in Andalus, a lot of it was Spanish. And so in order for us to almost consolidate all this information and go and read and learn, you would have to speak all these languages. And so the easiest for us is that we always tune into Google English. And so, but the information that you would get in Google English is not necessarily the whole truth.
No.
And there's this beautiful book by Michael Hamilton called Lost History. And he talks about the Islamic lost history, because that is the history that is lost to the world. Because it has to do, again, we go back into politics of why that was kind of put aside. And for example, nobody really knows that since 650 AD, that when we went to Sicily, that we were there for 500 years, 500 years. But that is not anywhere. If you do even a Google search, Sicily, there will be nothing there. And so it is extremely relevant. It is extremely relevant, not that we go back and doing things the way they were done, but it is important that we know who we are and where we come from. And the importance of this, Mohsen, to me is that we can gather some integrity. When I give lectures or I give talks and I talk about just a single color, people come and tell me, these are Americans, they tell me that they're originally, one man who teaches at Pittsburgh University was saying that he is originally from Andalus. And he told me, I'm walking out of this auditorium like 4 inches taller. And this is what I want to achieve. I want to achieve by bite sizes, if it's through what you're doing, if it's through Islamic art, if it's through furniture or artifacts or films or all the things that we can do together.
Yes,
is not to overwhelm people or a young generation with all these reading materials, but maybe planting a seed of interest. Maybe a color indigo and a story of indigo would just plant a seed of interest, and then the world is open. You would go and try to read more and to invite more people and learn. It is important that we know our self-worth. I think what has happened in the Muslim world in general, that people are somehow broken, if not visible, they're broken from the inside. And I think because we don't know where we come from, we don't know our worth. And the whole idea of promoting art for me was a way to bring dignity, to bring credibility, to bring pride, without void of politics and void of religion. Because Islamic art is, again, a knowledge and science-based art form.
Absolutely.
And so it offends no one, and everybody loves this, and everybody thinks it's beautiful. It doesn't matter where you're from, what age and what color and what creed.
And as you and I said on Friday when we spoke, and it becomes even more beautiful when you understand the why behind why a particular artist has done this particular brushstroke or done that particular thing on their piece of art. I just wanted to ask you, I mean, you've said there's some amazing pearls of wisdom that you've given us today so far, Sonia. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to just really build on why I think it's really important for companies like IslamicArtPrints.com to talk to people like you, cultural design experts. For us, one of the primary purposes when we set up IslamicArtPrints.com was to revive the tradition of Islamic art, and that's what I discussed with you on Friday.
Yes.
But more than that, it's because we wanted our artists who have all kind of reclaimed their own narrative of Islam to be able to have a platform by which to transmit that message. Because it's been hijacked over the last 20, 30 years. Yes. And really, it's so important now more than ever for us to be able to kind of take back the control of the narrative, and for our artists to be able to have a platform through which they could talk about the beauty of their work or the beauty of Islamic art generally. Because as you said, it doesn't matter whether you are Muslim or not. Islamic art is beautiful and it will appeal to everyone.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask you, because you were a principal of your own company for many years, and as a woman in the Middle East, how easy has it been for you to be able to set up that business and to find success as a principal of your own business?
I think we need to leave the conversation and look, I don't want to say that it was difficult only for me because I'm in the Middle East. I want to say actually the truth of saying for women in general,
yes,
setting up businesses internationally is very difficult. I've been speaking, I've spoke to a lot of, I have a lot of colleagues who are my age group who are in Canada or in the US. And so the bureaucracy of things, of setting up businesses, obviously is very hard. And setting this up in Saudi Arabia around 20 somewhat years ago was especially difficult. It's like mission impossible, and I have to say that things balanced each other out. It had its pros, it had its cons. And I'll tell you what I mean. Because I was there and because not everyone could be there. And yes, I had to hustle and I had to fight, but I was able, because of it, to get my foot in the door with the Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs and say, give me a chance to do this. And if I was maybe in the US with all the freedom I would have had, maybe that would have not happened. Maybe I would have not had that opportunity to work with, let's say, the American Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because there would have been a lot of competition, So there was the struggle of gaining credibility as a female designer, interior designer, and you have to understand that an interior design for the world, not only for the Muslim world, is a very, very new profession. And it wasn't even legitimized until, I would say, the early 70s or late 60s in the United States. So it was always the architect, and then the interior designer was, let's say, in Europe and so on, with always decorators. And so it was only in the United States, I think, at the time when we went to this whole hospitality movement. And this was with the baby boomers in the 70s of starting to building hotels, that interior design became interior architecture and became a professional practice. So in the Middle East in general, and in the Gulf region, we don't have, like I said, an architectural heritage. And whatever we have is kind of borrowed from, let's say, influences of North Africa, let's say Morocco, Egypt, and then if you go to the Gulf region, it would be more related to Iran and India. And so all of a sudden saying, okay, now this is new profession and I want to do this. It is very new. And it's only now, 20 years later, that people are aware of what it is. And that's really a very big leap. That is actually huge, that within 20 years, anyone that I know in Saudi Arabia or in the Emirates or in the GCC who are going to build their house, they actually consider that this is a must. They have to find an interior designer, regardless if that is, at what level, which is phenomenal that happens so fast. So, and the setting it up was really, really hard. But I think what was harder was getting that credibility. And I think I was fortunate enough, by obviously fighting for it and hustling, working with the Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs, really killing myself, really killing myself to do this, because I knew if I would gain credibility with them, it would allow other Saudi designers to work with them as well, because then I somehow was like, a role model when it came to that. And I still take that very seriously, because I always think that, okay, they're always looking at me, or what is Sonia doing? And so I have to, carry that beacon. So. And
what an amazing job you've done, Sonia, honestly.
Thank you so much.
The more I learn about you, the more I'm really blown away by what you've achieved. So,
thank you.
How would you describe your own personal design aesthetic?
I didn't know what that was, but I've had my clients tell me what my design aesthetic is. And I'll tell you what it is, and I'll tell you where it came from. So I had, in 2014, one of my dear friends asked me to design a penthouse for her in Dubai. And she has houses all over the world, and I had no idea why, she would choose me. Yes, we're friends, but I didn't know why she wanted me to do this. And so she gave me this title, and she said, because what you do is Armani meets the Ottoman Empire. And I loved it. It was beautiful that, you know, because I could not articulate it any better if I had to. I had another friend of mine, again, a client, who recently told me, what you do is Saudi style. I love it. And I told her, but what is Saudi style to you that you identify with it? And she said, it's very modest, it's calm, because I use a lot of limestone and carved limestone. She said it's calm, it's modest, it's understated, but at the same time, she said it's massive and it's majestic, you know. And so it was interesting how they would perceive this, that it was majestic, but at the same time it's calm and it's quiet. And I think as a person, I always seek serenity myself. I want things to be calm. I want to always be away. I avoid conflict. I just want everything to be calm. And so I had to kind of imagine and think that where did this aesthetic come from? And interestingly enough, growing up, the only place internationally as Muslims, the place we can see Islamic art is at museums. Mm-hmm. And so I love museums because they're quiet, they are organized, because I'm a neat freak. So everything is organized, everything is structured, everything is nicely labeled. And somehow these interiors force you, they command respect. And even if you're like this wild child, you see even hippies, and so everybody is very organized. They walk very slowly. They have their little pamphlet. You know, everybody behaves in a museum. And I think the spaces, the way they're organized, dictate that. They force you to be that way.
Absolutely.
And so these spaces were places of order for me, and they're places of calm and they're places of reflection, because people are quiet. People don't go into a museum and they start having loud conversations. Well, some people do, but in general, people are very observant. They go in, they either take the iPads or the audio guides, and then they actually spend time where we have no time for anything. But in the museum, people spend time. They look at something, and what was intriguing to me, and this sounds maybe very nostalgic or romantic, but I kind of identified personally with these artifacts. They were fragments. They're fragments. They are fragments of memories. So you see a tile, but the tile has a bigger story. It's part of a whole madrasa. Absolutely. Or it's maybe it's stolen, and maybe it's looted. And so you look at this tile and you think further and you think, but I wish I was there. I want to know what is the story of this tile. I want to know how they made this. I want to know who built it. If it's a bowl, you look at, let's say, an Ottoman bowl, and you wonder, did they have sherbet in this bowl, or did they have a bowl of noodles? And who are the people who used it? And so to me, museums became a depository of memories and depository of stories. And so I really identified personally with this, because I feel our lives and our homes are depository of stories. Like if I asked you if you remember a birthday when you were a child, you might remember the birthday cake, or you might remember that on that day you got a bike and you fell down and you hurt your knee. But you will not remember everything. You will remember fragments, memories. And so to me, when I design almost museums, I want to say, because I find solace and I find serenity in them, and my clients do as well. And in them they are depositories of their memories and fragments. And so with every project we start, if it's a cultural project, if it's a sovereign project, then it has its own requirements. But if it is a private project, and we have private clients, obviously, so they always come to me with an Islamic art story. And because they know I build interiors on Islamic art stories. So if they don't have one, they have to go and they have to come back with one for me. So they have to come and tell me, we really like this miniature, or we really love this, let's say your print, this art print. And then the analysis starts, and it starts, but why do you like this miniature? What draws you to this miniature? And it could be a color, it could be a pattern, it could be a character, it could be a poem. And so gradually I kind of extract these stories from them. And it's incredible, the stories that come from that. And so based on these stories, we have to have a story. Without a story, I can't design an interior. We have the story. And with that story, I also know who to pull in, because my whole point is to create an Islamic art experience. And so I pull in different artists, designers, as part of this. And I have to say, I mainly work with women designers, because I believe in the arts of the Islamic world, women don't have a voice. And so there's incredible work out there. So I want to promote that as well. So then I start, let's say, looking at this and thinking, oh my God, Sarah would be perfect for that. Or this story, and this person would. And so I start drawing them in through this narrative. And by the time we are done, the projects are extremely unique to that person. Mm-hmm. They don't have a theme, because it's not a theme park. They don't have a certain color, and people love these spaces, no matter what their personal style is. It's really incredible. So you can have this woman dressed all in Versace, and she loves my interior, and I don't understand because it doesn't look like her. But they find this sense of serenity, or this sense of calm, yes, and belonging that I can't explain. But this really has to do with my own outlook on things. I want to be in a place. I want to be in a place that's safe. And I think growing up from all these, these traveling from one place to another, not really fitting in, wanting to belong, for me, a home or interior always became a sanctuary. I wanted to create sanctuaries for people.
That's a really, really beautiful answer. Really beautiful answer. I really loved what you called a depository of memories. And you're absolutely right. I mean, if I just talk about this painting behind me, for example, this painting was one that I bought when I took my wife to Brazil for her 30th birthday. So there's already a story there about why this particular painting is so important to us.
Correct.
And really, as you say, it's about making sure that you create an environment which is something that you can relate to, that's something that you can be in, and just have a sanctuary to call your own. It's a really, really beautiful explanation, Sonia. And somebody there actually asked a question about what would you do if you had a client that asked you to create something that was completely different, but actually you answered it in your response anyway, in the response to the question. But no, that's a really beautiful explanation. Your inspiration then, I mean, I'm guessing you draw inspiration from so many things. It's not just one area. Tell us a bit about how you go about preparing yourself for a project.
This is actually funny, because every time there's a new project, I feel like I'm a fraud. I really, and I was talking about this with a friend of mine in South Africa, if she's watching. And so it's this, I don't know, there's a syndrome for this. And so I feel like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. How am I going to do this? No, I can't do this. I should not take this project. What were they thinking? They want to give me this project. Mm-hmm. And so I go through that. So, but I think that this fear is also what drives you to try harder. I think I don't really prepare for a project. I'll tell you how this is. I'm like a child. My personal drive is new ideas. And so if you told me that you're going to start this business tomorrow, I would have 1 million ideas for you, because this is my drive. And so the moment I just get a phone call, before they even fill out a form, or before I'm already like, oh my God, this project can look like this, and we can do that, and I can get this person on board. And so there's no real preparation, but it is always the story. Once I have the story in place, and this is actually just now for a UNESCO World Heritage project that we been awarded, and it's the first residence of King Abdulaziz in Jeddah, in old Jeddah, Beit Nasif. And it's an old Ottoman building. And so the Ottoman governor was living there, and then King Abdulaziz, when he took siege of Jeddah, so this became his place of residence. And so the moment this fell, let's say, in our lap, it's such a huge, and we're still working on this right now, in the beginning of it. So I hired a curator, and we started brainstorming, and what could be that one story. that one story that would bring the whole building, the gallery spaces, the museum spaces, the restaurant, all of that together. And once we had, not to give it away because you'll see it in our posts and so on, but once we nailed that one story, so everything now is fantastic. And so now everything grows. So I have to brainstorm. I have to build a story, a real storyline, and not a theme of, do they want a classical interior or do like blue curtains? So not that, but to build a storyline.
So for people who have never really bought or invested in art before, whether it's a print or an original piece.
Yes.
What kind of advice would you give somebody that's looking for something to hang in their home?
Okay. I was actually thinking about this before we started talking about Islamic art prints, because no, really, I wanted to understand and think about this, of how this could grow, like what we talked about a few days ago,
Yes.
how to make this
Yes.
grow and how is it relevant. And I had to go almost, I had almost had to become like the devil's advocate and saying, why do we even have that? Why do we need this? You know, so that I can justify why we need to do it.
Yes.
And so I went almost backwards, trying to go through history and saying, why did we not have paintings? And why do the West buy more paintings than people do in the Middle East in general? And so I had to go back to the concept of that we didn't have things to hang on walls, because if it was a mosque or a madrasa, and the decoration was already within the walls. There was tiles,
And
there
the tiles,
were
the calligraphy, yes,
calligraphy, carved stone, and so on. And so the introduction of framed art in general is something
Yes.
that actually came much later with, I would say, around 16th century, when we started opening up to the West. And we had the Orientalists, like during Ottoman Turkey, there were European embassies and ambassadors going to Istanbul. Then you had their painters arriving, documenting the same thing in Egypt and India. And so this concept of portrait painting and so on really came in much later. Yes, we had also much later the miniatures and so on, but those were for a different purpose. They were not for decoration. They were visual biographies.
Yes.
They were like selfies, like they're today's selfies. You know,
Yes.
I'm in the hunting ground and I'm at the court, and you know, and so this way I look better.
That's a great
this way,
analogy, Sonia.
it's a modern day selfie. So in fact, and the prohibition of drawing souls, you know, is also a whole nother thing why we never have paintings, and it's a very new thing. And so still in houses, people would put, in more modest houses, to put, you know, Allahu Akbar, and to put things like that.
Yes.
So I realized, even with my clients, that they love the stone walls. Everybody wants these stone walls, but I can't get them to buy a painting.
Okay.
And you get other designers tell me they'll buy an expensive handbag, but they will not buy an art piece, a painting. And I try to explain to them, it is not the issue of money. It is the issue of familiarity. It is not something that we are familiar with. Now, having a whole nother generation and the expansion of, let's say, the number of Muslims in the world, we don't all live in a Muslim, or let's say an Alibaba or 1001 Night environment. So there are people like you who live in London or live in Manchester or in Australia and so on.
Yeah.
And so now we want to bring a little bit of that into our homes. And our homes are not madrasas, and they are not these beautiful, let's say, adobe houses, and they are not, and they are, you know, purpose built. And we still want to bring an element of our ethnicity or our culture into our houses. Can everyone afford these expensive collections, like the collection of Nasser Khalili? No, we cannot. And what I like about Islamic art prints is that you're making this accessible. And I consider this, again, like a popcorn effect. So if you have the first one, you can't stop, because then you like this and then you buy more. But what I was thinking about this morning, and I would have, maybe we do other posts that you can share later with your audience. I was thinking about what would attract the general Muslim society, let's say, or it, because the Europeans will buy it because it's part of their culture to buy prints, to put it on their wall.
Yes.
It is not part of our culture. So I was thinking, what would make this attractive and how would it become attractive? And then I did a little research for myself, and I asked a few questions here and there. And it was very interesting to me that people from the Islamic world, when they travel to other countries, if they go to Cordoba, they go to Turkey, it doesn't matter where they go, they will still do their checklist of going to museums. Even if it is just to take a selfie and say, I've been there, but they will still go to museums. So the context, so they might not go to galleries because that's not maybe their interest to go to a gallery opening and so on, but they will go to the museums. They'll go to the British Museum, they'll go to the Victoria and Albert Museum, and they will see the Art Jamil Gallery. So I realized that the only place they would see Islamic art again would be in a museum concept or context. So my question is almost like this devil's advocate question. What if that these prints would be featured in a context that is familiar to them? So instead of having a print with a basic frame into, let's say, a preset interior of a retro sofa and there, because they would not relate to this retro sofa or that. But if they are displayed almost like a tile, if they're displayed as if it is in a museum, this museum context is very familiar to us, even to a younger generation. And then it becomes almost Armani meets the Ottoman Empire. In the sense, I was thinking, if I were now to buy 4 or 5 these prints for my flat in Istanbul, how would I display them? And I thought, okay, first I would remove the frame. I would either box frame it, so I would have a thickness, so I can put that in front. So it already now is 3-dimensional. It has a 3-dimensional effect. Yes. So now it looks like an artifact to me. So that would be maybe one thing. The other would be maybe like in a museum, that is not actually flat, but I would have, let's say, a floating shelf. That would be these floating shelves that you can buy from IKEA. You can get it in white, you can get it in black, you can get it in dark brown. You even get it in an indigo blue. Okay. And so they have smaller ones, like your square ones, and then they have the longer ones. And once you put that on the wall, it's seamless.
Yes.
And then you could stack these pieces on them. And if you have a rental, you don't have to make holes in the wall, You just stack them, and then next to it you have a few beautiful candles, and you have maybe a glass with some flowers, and so you can always change them. You can always move them around, and especially if you were to take that one feature wall and paint that like really dark, like if you took some photos of a museum you like, and let's say you were in Berlin or you were in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and you really have very dark gray walls. So all of a sudden you have one feature wall, like again, let's say you're in a rental. You don't even have to paint that wall. You get maybe some fabric, a dark fabric, staple gun it over a board, fix that to the wall, have your floating shelf, and have these things. And all of a sudden you have curated a display. So it looks like a museum. And it brings value to the pieces. And people also feel good about the pieces rather than they think, well, I just got a print. So I think how you style this and how you curate this is really important. And so I was thinking of giving you a project of saying, okay, why not engage with a few young curators in London and say, these are the prints, do a vignette for us, and either one raises funds for it or that they would be featured, but then you could see all these different solutions, almost like an open call. And you can also do that for interior designers in the Middle East and the Muslim world in general. And so let's say the winner of the best vignette would get 2 prints or something like that. Okay. But I think it would be very interesting to see how different designers different curators or different walks of life in different parts of the world would curate a vignette with these prints, even if it's in Photoshop or 3D or however they want it, or manual or a collage. But it would be really interesting to see, to say, okay, these are your prints, now go do something with it.
Okay.
You know,
that's a really great idea. But look, I've got Siddiqa Juma on here, who's one of our co-founders, and she's also a contemporary Islamic artist who's loving this idea. We've got Billings 9555. I like the idea of box frame. I think you're very right that it will look like something very special. So definitely hitting the right marks here, Sonia. Definitely hitting the right marks. I wanted to ask you, what would you say would be the highlight of your career to date? If you were to name one really, really special project that just sticks out in your mind, that meant so much to you, which one would it be and why?
I would say the Saudi embassy and residence in Warsaw, Poland. And it was maybe the only project in which I was able to realize really what I wanted to achieve. And it was a very sentimental, it was a very hard project, a really hard project to work with different authorities, you know, to get it to where it is. But it was a project in which I was able to consolidate exactly what I talk about designing specifically to a context. And so Warsaw, Poland was in World War II, had 100% destruction. And so a metropolis of 1 million people became only 25,000. And so I was fascinated by this culture that when Nazi Germany moved out and they were rebuilding their city, that on their top 10 list there was highways and schools, but then there was the opera house and then a museum and a library. And I thought it was really interesting to see such a culture that they would have these three cultural things in the first top 5 after full destruction. They rebuilt their city to the 16th century. And so my storyline became 16th century. It became a country that is celebrating art and culture and their museums. And I wanted, with the Saudi embassy and residence, to be, let's say, in harmony with their vision. And so this embassy was designed, and you'll find it on my website, both the residence and the embassy, because they were kind of connected with the courtyard. So this project looks like a museum from the interior in every way, even the bedrooms and you know, the visa section. It looks like a museum. It's old stone, beautiful carved patterns, worked with different graphic designers for this. And so it was celebrating the 16th century parallel of the Islamic world. So we had the influences of the Persian miniatures and the Ottoman Islamic tiles, because both were the highest form of art at that time. And so this project means a lot to me, because it was exactly to narrate the story, to have the right architects, to have the right contractor, to have the right support to actually make this happen. And it's a project that won an award, an International Design Architecture Award in 2017. And it's one of those projects that everybody that came to visit, including my Versace woman or this animal print dressed woman, that everybody loved this. And it was interesting because I wanted to ask people, what is it you like about it? And nobody could say, I really like the curtains, or I really like, I don't know, the furniture. Everybody just was saying, it just feels good. It feels good. There was such a sense of serenity. So I think that would be, yes, the highlight project of what I've done so far.
I mean, that just sounds incredible. It sounds absolutely incredible. And what would you want to be the legacy that you leave behind? I know it's a big question.
Yeah, it's a scary question, because, you know, I always have this fear that in the afterlife, I'll be standing there and then there'll be Gandhi and Martin Luther King right in front of me. And when my turn comes, and I'm like, and so what have you done? Yeah, you know, it's like really a big fear of mine. But the fear of, how can I say, I don't know if many people think this way. I look at the legacy that our ancestors left behind. And I don't know, is it that there's no much more we can do nowadays? Or is it we're not doing enough? Because it's not the issue of wanting to be remembered, because we don't really know who built the Taj Mahal, and we don't know where that little beautiful dish in the Bergman Museum comes from. But there was so much integrity in what people did. There was so much honesty in what they did. There was such a value for community and collaboration of things. And I think the legacy I would like, if I can leave anything behind, would be to start and instigate a movement where people take interest in their history, and that professionals start working together unconditionally. And it's not that this fight of who is going to shine, and this concept of these signature architects. I mean, this is so new. We don't know who built Al Andalus or Al Hamra, because it doesn't matter. What matters is that people came together and created something of beauty. And that's, I believe, is the essence of our faith as well. And somehow with this, I would say, Western propaganda that we live with every day, this concept of individuality is so has overwhelmed our lives, that it's no longer about the cumulative, it's no longer about community, it's about me, I, and myself. And I think if I can start anything, instigate anything, it would just be that people start working together for the better good, and not thinking about what am I getting out of this? Because I truly believe that with value there's success, and with success there's monetary reward anyway. But it can't be the goal. It can't be.
No.
And you're an ex-banker.
I am.
You know that.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And one thing, you know, I've mentioned to you that I'd worked with Siddiqa for the last 4.5 years.
Yes.
And she gets asked questions all the time from up-and-coming artists. You know, how do you commercialize your work? Siddiqa's response has always been, don't think about the money, because if this is about the money, you will never make money. It has to come from passion. It always has to come from passion. It always has to come from a place of integrity. So what you're saying absolutely resonates with me massively, Sonia. My final question to you is your advice to up-and-coming designers. If you were to be able to bestow any wisdom upon them, you know, having worked on some incredible cultural design projects yourself over the course of your career, what would your advice be to people?
I think their goal has to be clear. It's a very hard question, because I don't know what their goal is. So when they come to me and when I advise or do some advisory teaching, I don't know what they want to achieve. I'm not saying they should have a business.
Just to let you know, we only have 40 seconds before this goes off.
Okay. I think one, they should know where they're going, and that they do something of purpose. Like you said, the money will come. Do things of purpose and work hard. Nothing comes easy. Really, they just have to work hard and know their stuff.
Amazing.
That's it.
Thank you so much, Sonia Ashour. It has been an absolute honor and pleasure to have you on our Instagram Live today. I wish you and your family a beautiful last week of Ramadan. And, you know, let's keep this conversation going. I know that you're going to be a much bigger part of our picture at IslamicArtPrints.com. Thank you so much. And
you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.